As I said, my name is Joe Decrion. I'm one of the pastors here at the Lynchburg City Church, and I'm very glad that you guys are here with us today. And all the information, I know that they'll make announcements at the end, but your bulletins has all the information, including the text that we're going to be looking at tonight. And I'd encourage you to, if you're interested in doing CSER or getting involved. I know Caroline does the ladies groups here on Monday night, and just being part of the family. If it wasn't already taken, I mean, I'd be using Olive Garden. When you're here, your family is a little catchphrase to Lynchburg City Church, but we don't want to get in legal trouble, and I'm sure Dan would advise me not to incorporate that phrase. That being said, as I said, my name's Joe. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm a Liberty graduate. I went to Liberty 05 to 09. I graduated. I went to seminary from 09 to 12. I graduated. I spent a year teaching over at LCA, and I am a captain in the United States Army Reserves. I serve as the battalion chaplain out of the 497th CSSB in Salem, Virginia. And tonight we're in Obadiah. And some of you, this will be a review, especially my intro, and I'm sure some of you could come up here and give this intro for me, but for others of you, this will be brand new. And one of the things about Obadiah is it's the shortest book in the entire Old Testament, 21 verses, 291 words, and all except the first verse is written in poetry. So to help us really glean a lot from this text, I like to introduce a strong historical background so that we understand as best as we can what Obadiah is expressing here. The story of Obadiah really begins back in Genesis chapter 25. Abraham's son was Isaac, and Isaac, well, he had two sons. And while they were in their mother's womb, the Bible tells us these two brothers, Jacob and Esau, were wrestling with each other in their mother's womb. It was a type of foreshadowing of the tension between both of these men and their families in the future. Well, Jacob would go and he would be the father of the nation of Israel. His brother Esau would be the father of the nation of Edom. We fast forward several hundred years. And I've got some stuff on the board here that I'll refer to. This is a map, sort of the Mediterranean. The ocean's here, Israel's here. Jacob would be the father of the nation of Israel. 12 different tribes composing Israel. Sometime after King Solomon died, the nation was turned upside down, essentially thrown into civil war. 10 tribes broke off into the northern kingdom and became known as Israel, while 2 tribes remained intact in the southern kingdom, known as Judah. But because of the wickedness of the kings of the northern kingdom, in 722, God brought the Assyrians, and they came as God's judgment upon the northern kingdom of Israel, and they were conquered and defeated. But our story today really begins around 609 BC. These 10 northern kingdoms, they're not there anymore, but the southern kingdom of Judah is still very much intact at 609. King Jehoiakim is king of Judah. And in 609 BC, Judah's allies, the Egyptians, fight a major battle against a new and rising power in the region. Coming from the banks of the Euphrates River, their king, the great Nebuchadnezzar, brought the might of the Babylonian Empire into this Trans-Jordan region. And in 609 BC, Judah's allies, the Egyptians, lost a major battle against Nebuchadnezzar. This was bad news for Judah. In 605 BC, shortly after this major conflict, Nebuchadnezzar and the force of his Babylonian military come to the gates of Judah, to Jerusalem, knocking on Jehoiakim's door, and he gives Jehoiakim the ultimatum. He says, you can all die, or this is how it's going to work, Jehoiakim. I'm going to take your wealth, I'm going to take your people, I'll let you be my ally, and you're going to be okay with it. Without their powerful Egyptian allies, Judah became essentially Nebuchadnezzar's pet. This arrangement wasn't one that was ideal under any circumstances, but the Bible clearly tells us that the Babylonians were raised up by God to carry out his judgment against Judah for their wickedness. In 601 BC, the Egyptians won a major battle against the Babylonian military. Jehoiakim, feeling as if this might be a turning of power, a turning of the tides in the region, decides to cancel his arrangement that he had with Nebuchadnezzar. In 598 and 597, the Babylonians come back. They're not just going to forget this happened. And they show up in Jerusalem during this time, lay siege to the city, of which during that time Jehoiakim died. His 18-year-old son Jehoiakim became king while it was short-lived, because Nebuchadnezzar would capture the city, take Jehoiakim, take more of the captives away. In 597, the second deportation took place. And for those of you who are familiar with the Bible story of Daniel in the lion's den, of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this all took place during the first deportation in 605 BC. They take the 18-year-old king into captivity, but before doing so, they established his uncle Zedekiah as the vassal or the puppet king to rule and govern in Judah. Well, Zedekiah doesn't like this arrangement any more than Jehoiakim did. And so in 594 and 593, he forms an international coalition to oppose Babylonian aggression in the region. And of the countries, of the nations that were part of this alliance, one of the nations was that of Edom. A nation to the southeast border of Judah, right below the Dead Sea, 70 miles north to south, 15 miles east to west. Now, as I said, going back to Genesis chapter 25, these two brothers, Jacob, who would be the father of Israel, and his brother Esau, who would be the father of the nation of Edom, they wrestled in their mother's womb. It was a type of foreshadowing of the tension of the struggle, not just between their relationship with each other, but between the relationships of their future sons and daughters between each other, this constant struggle in the region. However, during the time of this international coalition that's being formed to oppose Babylonian aggression in 594 and 593, Edom and Judah find themselves in an interesting position. They're now allied against the Babylonians. They've been enemies for hundreds and hundreds of years, but now they're allied. Well, the Babylonians get word of this, that Zedekiah, the vassal king of Judah, has canceled the agreement that they had after the second Babylonian captivity that took place here in 597. And in 586, he comes, yet again, to the gates of Jerusalem. But right before he arrives, the Edomites stab the Judeans in the back. They betray Judah. They hand them over to Nebuchadnezzar. They switch sides, these little opportunistic punks, you might say, and throw Judah under the bus. 586, Nebuchadnezzar takes Judah, takes the city, takes Zedekiah, the vassal king that he had put in place, executes his entire family in front of him, then rips out his eyes, and they take him and everyone else, except the poorest of the poor, into Babylonian captivity. And modern-day Babylon is somewhere in modern-day Iraq today. That's why I keep pointing across the board. It is a national crisis. It's a national crisis. I think I used the example, the illustration, maybe for you to feel something. I remember in the very first sermon, remembering what happened at 9/11. The terror that was struck that day in one city. There is no national government any longer in Judah. There is no military force in Judah. There is no economy. It is a third world state of poverty. What we know is that after 586, Nebuchadnezzar left only the poorest of the poor among the rubble. And that is where our story really begins today. We know essentially very little of the man Obadiah, though I placed the time of writing for his book sometime after 586 and sometime before 553, sometime in the mid-6th century. We know nothing about Obadiah other than his name, which means servant of Yahweh. And we know that he is having some type of vision. When we're reading the verses today, when we're unpacking the text, it's important to remember he is being allowed to see things that have not yet happened. He is overhearing conversations that have not yet taken place. In verse 10 of the text today, the prophet writes as such: Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you. Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. Obadiah doesn't depict two nations, Judah and Edom, here, but he depicts it in a way of two brothers, referring to Jacob and Esau. Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, he wants his audience to see not of these two nations in terms of two opposing countries, but of brothers from a common ancestry, of a common father. Jacob and Esau share the same father, Isaac, which, when we look at the text more today, really explains just the extent of the treachery of the house of Esau. Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you. I look at verse 10, and immediately there's a question that demands an answer. The question is what is making this so shameful? Or, excuse me, why is there going to be shame and humiliation? Why is there going to be shame and humiliation that will cover Esau? Answer, the first line of verse 10. Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob. Because of how you mistreated Jacob. Because of how you mistreated Jacob. There's going to be shame and humiliation that will cover you, Esau. Okay. But what makes it so shameful and so humiliating? That's an important question to ask. You say, well, shame and humiliation. No. Shame and humiliation is just a label. What is making it so shameful and so humiliating? It was my junior year at Liberty. It was 07, 08. This was back before they had the Tilly Center. The Tilly Center was essentially like a giant warehouse, and they had a Chick-fil-A, but it was like over by Main Street, past the indoor track, past North 1500, and this was before they had Flames Cash. I think we had Liberty One card? Okay, yeah, Liberty One card. Not nearly as cool as Flames card, but Flames Pass. And so I was going, I had asked this girl to have dinner with me. We'll call her Christy because that happens to be her name. And I was like, Christy, do you want to grab something with me at Chick-fil-A? She's like, sure, that'd be great. And she mentioned to me, she's like, yeah, also, in passing, she's like, my card, it's not working very well. I was like, oh, okay. So I grab my food, and I go, and I sit down. And I see her talking to the lady at the cash register, ringing her up, and it looks like she's having some problems. I'm thinking, how do you spell hero? J-O-E. Got it. So I get up, and I'm like, okay. Do kind of that strut, super cool. I got this. I walk over. There's Christy there, and the woman's ringing up at the cash register, and I reach my wallet, I pull out my card, I'm like, I got this. It's on me. And I don't even really look at Christy, I'm just kind of like doing one of these numbers like, yeah, that's right. I just paid for her with meal points. And then I look back at my table where my food is, and there's a girl sitting there waving at me. I'm like, what is that girl doing sitting at the table waving at me? And then I look, and I'm like, why is Christy sitting over there at the table? And then panic began to course through my veins. And then I hear this, yo man, what are you doing? Talking to my girl, man. And I'm thinking, I made a terrible mistake. And so I did the only thing I know how to do. I just pulled my cell phone out. You know one of those things before it even starts ringing? What's that, Mom? How much blood? You stay right there. I'll be there. Hang on. Gotta go. And I just walk out. And I sit down. And I explain everything to Christy. And I am just so embarrassed, so humiliated, and I'm telling her, she's laughing hysterically, and to make matters worse, I had left my card up there, so then the lady at the cash register, she's like, is there a Joseph in here? Joseph? Is there a Joseph? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I just want to hide under a rock right now. And so I have to get up and like take the walk of shame and walk past that couple where I tried to pay for the guy's girlfriend, and I'm just like, yes, take the card. It was really embarrassing. It was really, really embarrassing. It was really humiliating. It was shameful. It was whatever. But I went to bed that night. I woke up the next day. I lived to fight another day. It's whatever. We look back, we laugh at these. Like, Little did I know I'd use this sermon illustration. The difference is here. The difference is answering the question is what makes Esau's situation so shameful and so humiliating? And the answer comes at the end of verse 10. Because you shall be cut off forever. That's why it's so shameful. My situation was momentary. It was temporary. Go to bed, wake up the next day, life goes on. For the house of Esau, it would not be that way. It wouldn't be that way at all. Like, in other words, the nation of Edom, they're going to be destroyed forever. In other words, there's no coming back here. There is no respawning. There is no live to fight another day that's going to be taking place here. The reason it's so shameful and their situation is so humiliating is because they will be cut off forever. In the Old Testament, this sort of shame is very much reflected with a loss of status or a loss of prestige that at one time or another someone held. And of course, raises a serious question is, why should Yahweh do this to Esau? Why should Yahweh do this to Esau? Why should Yahweh impose this irreversible death penalty on Esau? Presents a very difficult question. And when we look at it, it might not seem fair at first. It might not seem fair. As I said last week in my sermon, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Might not seem fair. Like, these are very, very heavy, weighty things that we're wrestling with in this text. The prophet Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 35, 5-6, gives some devastating remarks about the atrocities that the Edomites committed against their brother. He says this, because you cherished perpetual enmity or hatred, and gave over the people of Israel to the power of the sword at the time of their calamity, at the time of their final punishment. Therefore, as I live, declares the Lord God, I will prepare you for blood, and blood shall pursue you, because you did not hate bloodshed. Therefore, blood shall pursue you. It's important to note when we look at this text that Obadiah wants us to see not Edom and Judah, but Esau and Jacob. He wants us to see it in terms of this fraternal relationship that these two men had all the way throughout their ancestry. It's important. Obadiah wants us to see that. And the reason he does is because it helps us to see the seriousness of the situation. Esau and Jacob come from the same father, from the same family. Esau should have been there to support Jacob. They should have been there to defend Jacob. And they were no-shows. And still some of us say, well, I think this is still fair. I mean, a momentary lapse where we betray them in 586, the Babylonians come. In fact, their treachery goes quite farther back into antiquity, into history. In fact, 200 years earlier, I flipped the page and I'm in Amos. And in Amos chapter 1, he describes continual treachery and sin committed on part of the Edomites against their brother, against Israel. In fact, he describes in chapter 1 how in the mid-8th century the Phoenicians were a major powerhouse player in this area. One of their major cities was located right up here north of the northern kingdom of Tyre. It was a major economic trading port hub, and much of the wealth and power derived from Tyre came from their slave dealings, from their slave tradings. And Amos levels heavy charges in chapter 1, verse 9 to 12 against Edom for buying up entire communities of not just slaves, but of Israelite slaves. And so Obadiah holds out no hope that Esau will be restored. And still yet many will say, I don't think that's fair of Yahweh to impose this irreversible death penalty. Some of us will say that because we live in a society where what? We want it to be fair. And when things aren't fair, we get upset. We get really upset. I think perhaps the tension is oftentimes is instead of allowing the pages of this book to determine who God is, we allow our own preconceived ideas and opinions and emotions to do that. And essentially, we take this book, throw it over our shoulder, and allow our emotions to determine what is right and what is wrong, what God is, who God is. We do that all the time. Like, I don't know how many conversations, especially dealing with the fairness of God, with the issue of hell. I don't know how many people say, it's not fair for a loving God to send people to hell for all of eternity. It's just not fair. I've had tons of conversations with witnessing to other people, and people say that all the time. How is that fair for a loving God to send people to hell? And I usually use this example. I say, all right, imagine you're in an elevator with me, okay? And I start just pounding you in the face like Ray Rice and his girlfriend. Now, how many of you say I'm going to get in trouble for doing that if I do that to you? Come on, be proud! Like half of you think I'm going to get... This is America. For those of you who weren't sure, I'm going to get in trouble if I assault you and pound you in the face. Now, let's substitute his girlfriend, his wife, let's substitute that with the President of the United States. If I did the same thing to the President of the United States, would I get a more severe penalty? How many of you think so? Yeah, I would, right? You'd probably be like, yeah, I haven't seen Joe in a while. Yeah, don't know what happened to him. Some guys in suits showed up at his house, and that's it. You say, why would it be more severe? Because he's the president. That's the answer. Because of the position he holds. An offense against the president is that much more severe against an offense against any other person, and so it is with God. An offense against Yahweh demands that much greater penalty. It's that much more serious, the things that Esau is doing. That's why, for those of you who struggle with the fairness and the justice of God, this isn't justice issue. How is it fair that in verse 10 he says they're cut off forever? How does that make sense? And then for others of you, you still struggle with that. And my second response goes something like this. Perhaps it's more impatient than my first. When people say, well, I wouldn't do it like that. Well, I don't like that. I would do it a totally different way. And I say, well, that's okay because you're not God. And you should probably just shut up and read your Bible some more. That's my short answer. I see it all the time, like people just make hash out of this book. It's as if they take out the pages. I don't like that page. I don't like that page. Okay, I like this. That's called idolatry, when you make God how you want to make him. Oh, how I pray, church, that you would let this book speak to you. That you would be careful to not allow your emotions to determine what the pages of this book say. This book says some really hard stuff. Church, it really does. I'll tell you right now, I'm not being hard for the sake of being hard today. If you wanted to come and just have me tell a bunch of jokes or whatever, I'm sorry, you're in the wrong place, but there's 100 other churches in this area that you can go to. Okay, I say hard things to you because the Bible says hard things. It's a hard thing to say when you look at this. You say, how can God sentence them to this irreversible death penalty? And yet he does. And he's perfectly just. He's perfectly right for doing so. Yep. Verse 11 says this. I love verse 11. We're going to unpack this a lot. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates, and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them, Esau. You were like one of them. On the day. On that day. So you say, well, what day is that? This phrase, on the day, it refers to a historical period of time. It's referring to this. In 586, when the Babylonians came in and they razed Judah to the ground, and they took everyone except the poorest of the poor people. That's the day that he's referring to. On the day that you stood aloof. On the day that strangers carried off his wealth. In most of your English translations, it uses the word wealth. My ESV, which I love so much, uses the word wealth. But as I was studying this text a little more closely, I observe that this interpretation of the word wealth seems unlikely, or at the very least incomplete. While the Hebrew word can indeed refer to wealth, it also has a wide range of other meanings, including, but not limited to, military force, an army, a noble person, or a class of people, of which case we have the question, well, which sense of the word should we use to best fit the present context? 605, the first deportation. We know they took people. They took Daniel, they took Shadrach, they took his friends. It happened again in 597, it happened again in 586. Does this word mean wealth, silver, gold? Yes, but we should also see it in terms of human slaves. I think it's important to understand the seriousness of this situation. Because it is serious. On that day you stood aloof. On the day that strangers carried off his wealth and people, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. Obadiah says something very strange right here, church. I want to make sure you see that. At the end of verse 11, he says, you were like one of them, Esau. Well, how can Esau be like one of them? He didn't do any of these things. The Babylonians did all these things that we just read about. But Obadiah says, Esau, you were like one of them. On that day that you stood aloof. The reason that he sees them, the reason that Yahweh sees him, as even though they didn't actually participate with the Babylonians, the reason that he sees them in such a way is the answer is because on that day you stood aloof. Literally, you stood opposite from. It doesn't just suggest distance, but also opposition. Help was needed. The Judeans needed help. In 586, when Nebuchadnezzar came and razed the city to the ground, they needed help. People, wealth, their city was in a national crisis. But Esau didn't come. They didn't so much as lift a single finger to help them. And their behavior shows not just that they were opposed to Judah, but that they were Judah's enemies. One commentator rightly says, refusing to come to the aid of someone in need is the same as rendering the harm yourself. Yahweh is not happy. Yahweh is furious right now. I could pull from the New Testament, James 4:17. Jesus' little brother James, his half-brother, the pastor of the Church of Jerusalem, he says, it's a sin when you know the right thing to do and you fail to do it. Esau had forgotten their fraternal obligations to come to the help of their brother Jacob, and they stood there, and they didn't say anything, and they didn't do anything. And perhaps they're using this as an excuse. I don't know. I can't be sure. But it really reminds me almost of the story of Adam and Eve. They're in the garden. And the serpent comes, and he speaks to her, and he lies to her, and he deceives her. And where is Adam? He's standing right next to her. And what does he do? Nothing. And what does he say? Nothing. He stood aloof on that day, much in the same way that the house of Esau did with Judah. You see, it is a sin when you know the right thing to do and you fail to do it. And many of you think, well, I didn't say anything, right? When those 4 other girls were talking trash about that other girl and she wasn't here on the dorm and they were just gossiping and talking trash back and forth. Well, I didn't really do anything. Okay? I didn't participate. Yeah, but you didn't say anything either. You didn't say anything either. Like that excuse will not fly. You didn't say anything. You should have said, ladies, listen, I don't know if this is true or not, but she's not even here to defend herself or even give a response. Like, that would be the appropriate answer. Like Adam in the garden, he should have said, Eve, we're done. Eve, we're going. Eve, this it's over. He should have spoke up. He did nothing. He should have acted. He did nothing. It's that sin of passivity that's really here. They stood aloof on that day. They watched the Babylonians come in and slaughter the Judeans. And they did nothing. And Dave, I'm glad you said that earlier in the service about just being friendly and reaching out to people. Just works really well with what I'm about to say next. I'm trying to calm myself for this next part, because I'm pretty angry. We come in here, okay? We come in here, and we have church. We do the intermission, and we take 3 to 5 minutes, and we talk to people, right? And some of you guys do really good. You guys are always thinking, oh, who's new? Oh, I'm going to go talk to that person. Oh, that person looks kind of lonely. I'm going to go befriend them. Some of you guys do great. But others of you, I don't know what's wrong with you. Like some of you do great, but there's other people in here, and it's just like, oh, I'm just going to talk to the same people I see every week because I don't want to go outside my comfort zone because that might be uncomfortable. Or I'm just not really feeling social right now. You're like, I don't want to push myself out. I'll just talk to the same people every week. You know, the new people, or if there's people I don't know, they can just fend for themselves. And if you're new here tonight, I'm not talking to you right now. But others of you, like you're a joke. You're a joke. You come up with every excuse in the book. You're like, I'm not really doing anything wrong. Yes, you are. It's a sin when you know the right thing to do and you don't do it. It's a sin when you know the right thing to do and don't do it. And the impact that you just having a 3-minute conversation with someone could have. The stakes are high. People's souls hang in the balance. Or do you just assume that every single person in here listening to me speak right now is a Christian? Because if I was a betting man, I would pull out all the money in my wallet and say there's at least one person here that doesn't know Jesus, regardless of what they profess. And I can tell you right now, that this year, we have had atheists here, we have had Muslims here, we have had people that earlier in the week tried to kill themselves. And some of us, we're too uncomfortable to get out of our pew and just go have a conversation. Because I don't know, it might make me feel too awkward. And so we say, well, I'm not really doing anything. That's my whole point. They stood aloof on that day. And they couldn't even so much as lift a finger or speak up on behalf of the Judeans. Well, I'm just not a very social person. I don't care what your excuse is. Like every day people are going to hell. Church, come on. That should upset you. It upsets me. I get 30 minutes a week to try and plead with you, to try and motivate you, to try and point out giant truths in this Bible. Goodness. Like I love you so much, church. But some of you just, what's the quote? Like, evil triumphs when good men do nothing. And you just stand aloof. And you're like your father Adam. You're like the complete fool. And this sin of passivity. Well, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing all those bad things. Yeah, you're not doing anything. You're not speaking up when people are gossiping. You're not being friendly and just being the church to people in here. You're not serving, you're not involved. I said last week there's 10% of the people here that do 90% of the work. And some of you guys, that 10%, thank you. Goodness, thank you. Appreciate it so much. And others of you think, oh, I'll just check the box. I'll just show up here on Sunday night. I'll just take up space for an hour and 15 minutes. And I'm good to go. Hardly. You know, we have this great partnership here with Pastor Bill and our United Methodist brothers and sisters in Christ. And 2 weeks ago, we had an announcement. You know, hey, service project Saturday. You know, if you guys can help. You know, the United Methodist here, there are a lot of elderly people. They don't have a lot of young muscle. It's hard for them to be able to do things. And we had an opportunity to serve them. And we made the announcement, put things on Facebook. And listen, this isn't for everybody. I get 2 people to show up. One of the persons didn't even go to church here. God's given you spiritual gifts. If Jesus has saved you, He's given you gifts. Like, why aren't you using them? Like, some of you are just wasting your gifts. So I don't know what my gifts are. That's okay. That's okay. Volunteer for everything. There's so many opportunities. They stood aloof on that day. There were people that needed help. There were their brothers that needed help. And they didn't so much as lift a finger, let alone speak up for them. It's a sin. It's a sin when you know the right thing to do, ladies and gentlemen, and you don't do it. And God is not happy with you. Yahweh is furious at Esau. And some of you, he is not happy with it all. For this sin of passivity, like your father Adam. Do not gloat. Do not gloat over the day of your brother in the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their ruin. Do not boast in the day of distress. Verse 13. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Do not gloat over his disaster in the day of his calamity. Do not loot his wealth in the day of his calamity. Yahweh sees what Esau's doing. He's saying, Esau, don't you do that. Don't you do that, Esau. Esau's looking down. Judah, yeah. And little do they know, it's almost a foreshadowing. It's almost when they're looking down on Judah, it's a reflection of them and their destruction. I placed the time of writing of the story sometime in the mid-6th century, between 586 and between 553, because on this date, it's game over. It's game over. God's judgment is executed on the house of Esau, and they're destroyed. By the end of the 4th century, they cease to even be recognized as a nationality, as a people group by the end of the 4th century. But that is when they were destroyed. Verse 14, he says, do not stand at the crossroads to cut off his fugitives. Do not hand over his survivors in the day of distress. Esau, don't you ambush, don't you try and kill, don't you take those prisoners, don't you take those Judeans who were fleeing from 586 after Nebuchadnezzar comes and destroys the city, burns Judah, don't you take them, don't you take advantage of them. That's exactly what Esau does. And you look at a big guy like Ray Rice, this big strapping man, he should be there protecting his woman, looking out for her. And he does neither. How could she? She can't go toe-to-toe with a big running back like that. Esau, don't you dare. Don't you prey on those men, women, and children that are fleeing the city. Don't you do that. Don't you take advantage of it. And they did. At the crossroads, he says, taking them, selling them into slavery, both to the Babylonians and to other slave traders. They stood aloof on that day. They didn't so much as speak up or say anything. Like their father, Adam. He should have said, Eve, we're done. This isn't right. We're leaving. And he just stood there. Like a moron. With his mouth shut. Failing not just to speak, but failing to act. Failing to do the right thing. It is a sin when you know the right thing to do, when you feel the conviction of the Holy Spirit telling you to speak up, or to not speak, or to act, or to not act. It's a sin when you know the right thing to do, and you don't do it. God is not happy with Esau. And as I said earlier, some of you in here, God's not happy with you either. He's not. And I could be nice and pretend that the Bible doesn't say hard things like that, but it does. Like Jesus says, hard things, church. And I would not be a good man if I just frosted over those parts. It's a sin. When you know the right thing to do and you don't do it. On that day, they stood aloof, off to the side, and just watched everything go to hell, literally and figuratively.